I'm Linda van Tilburg for Biz News. We are now truly counting down to the 2024 elections, which, if you look at opinion polls, will definitely be a watershed election. And joining me is political analyst Moeletsi Mbeki, so we can talk a little bit about what we can expect. Hi, Moeletsi.
Hi there, how are you?
Thanks again for joining us.
Pleasure.
Well, if we look at the opinion polls, it keeps on saying the ANC might end up below 50%. Do you think they're accurate?
Well, we actually have an accurate figure which came from the local government election in November 2021. Now, that was not speculation. It was not an opinion poll. It was the voters. And in that election, the national tally of the ANC for the first time was below 50%, and it was 46%. So we know for a fact that the ANC has fallen below 50% from a real election, which was the local government election. So yes, the expectation is that the ANC will fall below 50%.
In a previous interview, when we discussed leaders and the lack of leaders on the opposition side, you were hoping that somebody would rise from the business sector. So we've had Rise Mzansi, we've got, and then now I see Roger Jardine's name is mentioned. He had talks with the DA. Is that what you had in mind?
Not exactly what I had in mind. My own view is that we need the real captains of industry, i.e. the owners of capital. Songezo Zibi was an employee, I think, of a mining company called Extrata, if I'm not mistaken. And then he was an employee of Business Day. He was an editor of Business Day. Roger Jardine has been an employee of Avenge, the engineering company. He was made chairman of FirstRand Holdings, but he was director general, which is an employee of the Department of Arts and Culture. These are not owners of capital; these are managers. What I meant by business, I mean the real owners of capital in South Africa. I won't name names. I think you know who I'm talking about.
I was just about to ask you who you want to refer to.
No, I don't think I'll name names. But those are the key people in the country. Of course, they employ managers, or they may assign their managers to stand for elections. I don't know. But for me, the critical people are the guys who own our banks, are the guys who own our retail companies, are the guys who own our automobile and who own our industry. Those are the people I was talking about. I wasn't talking about the managers of the banks or the managers of newspapers and so on.
Well, can we turn to the DA? Because the DA was speaking to Roger Jardine about a future leader. Do you think that was a real discussion? Because we always remember what happened to Mampela. Or do you think it was just to appease their backers, the people who pay, give the money?
Well, I really don't know what happened, because we are all dependent on what is reported in the media. From what I heard, the people who are funding the DA, and that is public, is the Oppenheimer family, the female side of it, and Michael Leroux. Those are the main funders of the DA, according to published information. The story is that they are the ones who are saying to the DA that they should involve Roger Jardine in their leadership. How true that is, I have no idea.
Well, can we look at the multi-party charter and the opposition parties? Because if the ANC falls below 50%, do you think they have their act together? Is the multi-party charter what we need for people to get together and be a real opposition for the ANC?
Well, that's so speculative. The reality is that we have independent candidates and we have political parties. I doubt if independent, let us assume independent candidates acquire the 200 of the National Assembly vote. Do they constitute a party? Will they be able to form a government amongst themselves? So those are the unknown questions about the independent parties. If the ANC remains the largest political party in the country, which the expectation still is that even if it falls below 50%, it will remain the largest political party, then technically it will probably have to form the government, which means it has to put together the coalition that constitutes the government. So it still remains a central player in the politics of the country. Of course, it's if it needs coalition partners, it means that its programs get diluted by the compromise it had to strike with the coalition partner. So there are a number of very interesting unknowns that are coming up in the coming election. But don't hold your breath. There are no miracles coming around the corner. South Africa is an old country. It's an old society. And there are no miracles that will come out of elections.
Well, even the FD says the ANC will inevitably fail, but just not yet. Do you agree?
I'm inclined to agree. But it depends what you mean by fail. If you mean it fails to get 50%, yes, I agree. It has already failed. It's not that it's likely to fail. It has already failed to get 50% in the last local government election. But it's still the government of South Africa. So I think now it will still be part of whatever coalition. It will still be a central part. But the problem with South Africa is not so much now whether the ANC is there or is not there. The point is that the ANC has no policies to sort out the unemployment in South Africa. It has no ability to run the railway system. It has no ability to run the electricity power generation system. And I don't see anyone amongst all the multiplicity of parties, and we have hundreds of them, who have the capacity to manage the railway infrastructure of South Africa. Remember, we have nearly 30,000 kilometers of open line of railways. I don't see if it remains in state hands, I don't see any party that has the capacity to manage our railway infrastructure. Eskom is the largest company in Africa in terms of assets. I don't see any of the 300 plus political parties or the multiplicity of independent candidates being able to make a difference to how Eskom runs, how it is managed. So that is really, for me, that's the challenge of South Africa, is what are the solutions to our problems? And what I see and hear is people wanting powers. Of course, the South African government has a massive budget, 1.6 trillion rands. So many politicians and many ambitious young professionals want to get a piece of action of that 1.6 trillion rands. But I haven't seen a single solution other than saying, oh, we will ask somebody else to manage the railways. Well, that's not your solution. It's somebody else's solution.
Can we look at some of the, because you clearly don't see a party that's going to come up with solutions with South Africa now. And if we look at somebody new rising now, it's a bit late, isn't it? Do you expect anything like what happened in Lesotho or what happened in France? That somebody comes from nowhere and actually comes with solutions and, takes power in the country?
Well, I don't think our electoral system allows that anyway. So that is because you are sitting in the middle of this whole structure. You are sitting with the proportional representation demand of the Constitution. So the one individual, I think, in South Africa, I mean, we've had many prominent individuals since democracy: Mandela, Thabo Mbeki, Kgalema Motlanthe, Jacob Zuma, Cyril Ramaphosa. Some of these individuals have promised to solve our country's problems, but our problems are a lot more complex than individual leaders can solve. South Africa is an old country, remember, so it's nearly 400 years old if you look at when the Dutch East India Company came here. So its problems are not solvable overnight, certainly not by individuals.
There's a report from the Human Sciences Research Council that indicates that the South African youth is undecided and they actually don't think they should vote. Is that going to be a problem in the election, the fact that such a large part of the population won't vote?
Well, already we have a large part of our population not voting. I think I'm sure there are many reasons, but one of the main reasons is the ANC voters, especially the ANC voters in our 8 metros. Remember, our largest, most modern part of South Africa are the metros. And we have 8 metros. And the most important metros are the ones in Gauteng province, which are the 3 metros, which is Pretoria, Johannesburg, and Ekurhuleni. And then you have eThekwini in Durban, and then Cape Town in the Western Cape. So that's the heart of South Africa. The ANC used to control the 3 metros. The ANC voters used to be the majority of the 3 metros in Gauteng. It has lost that majority. And many of those voters don't support the opposition parties, or they don't see that the opposition parties provide solutions. So they don't vote, they stay at home. So that is, for me, one of the interesting parts about South Africa. It shows that the most highly educated, highly employed, the whites, for example, surveys show that the whites are demotivated from voting. They are not a large voting group, even within their demographic. So what I think that is telling us is that there was a hope that the ANC had a solution, and many people voted for the ANC. Today, many of those people, the same people, are disillusioned with the ANC, and they don't think the other parties are providing solutions. So many of them are staying at home and not voting. So that is the challenge that South Africa is sitting with.
What other issues are you worried about? Violence before the election, violence in KwaZulu-Natal, because I see that political assassinations are becoming more common. And just this morning, a businessman was gunned down in Sandton.
Well, we have a lot of us. We have assassinations in this country. As far as I can make out, they are within political parties rather than between political parties. I may be wrong, but I think they are within political parties. And a lot of them are not to do with politics. They are to do with the so-called feeding trough of how is the jostling to get access to the feeding trough, especially to the tenders of the municipalities, of the metros, of the central government, the provincial governments, and so on and so forth. So these are a big part of the drivers of the assassinations that are happening is access to the feeding trough through the tender system.
Well, but, except for in the KwaZulu-Natal, a high-profile DA politician was gunned down. Was that probably because the DA is starting to make inroads in KwaZulu-Natal?
I doubt it myself if it's to do with that sort of thing, with making inroads. The Indian population, for example, in KwaZulu-Natal, votes for the DA. And it has been voting for the DA for quite a long time. So I don't think that is necessary. But, these are issues that have to be investigated. But we can speculate about them. But
are you expecting, if there's a coalition, if the ANC is looking for partners, that it would first go for small parties, and if it can't, could there be a coalition between the ANC and the DA? And what about a coalition with the EFF?
Well, the ANC already has a coalition with the EFF in Johannesburg municipality and at Ekurhuleni municipalities. So the skies haven't fallen in because of that coalition. So I think that is possible, a coalition between the ANC and the EFF, in the same way that I think the ANC has coalitions in municipalities elsewhere with the DA. Remember, there isn't really much difference between these parties. It's not like in Europe, where you have Christian Democrats versus Social Democrats, where you have big programmatic and ideological differences. You don't have that amongst our political parties in South Africa. They are mainly jostling for a place in the sun, rather than that they have different agendas. So there isn't such a big difference between the ANC and the DA. And remember, the EFF, the main program, the main agenda of the EFF is the ANC's Freedom Charter. It's the ANC which was drawn up in 1955. So the EFF and the Freedom Charter was a moderate program. It was never a socialist program. Mandela mentioned this many times, that this is not a social program. It is intended to create a level playing field, so that in terms of opportunities in business, it was never in interest. It is not its intention to create nationalization under the Freedom Charter, to create a socialist state. And he emphasized that the ANC and himself are supporters of the British Constitution, of the American Constitution, that the ANC has never opposed capitalism. So you can see, we have a lot of political parties in this country, and we are desperate as voters, looking for something of interest from them. But actually, they are center-right parties, uh, and there are very little differences amongst themselves. So it's individuals. So our politics tends to be about individuals and what individuals are saying, what they're standing for. But individuals can't solve South Africa's problem. So I think we are a new democracy, let me put it that way. And we're still quite a long way in building a real democratic system in South Africa.
So do you expect, because of all this, a very low voter turnout?
So I expect a very low voter turnout. The introduction of the so-called independent candidates, nobody knows who these people are. So how are we going to? How are the voters going to decide who to vote for? If on the voting paper there is a name of Joe Bloggs who we know nothing about, then who is going to vote for this Joe Bloggs? Probably nobody. So you could end up with a situation whereby this so-called independents disappear anyway. And in any case, as independents, they can't form a cabinet. You have to be a party to form a cabinet. Individuals can't form. And so there are lots of there's a lot of problems with the new electoral act that the Constitutional Court and civil society and the ANC have put in place. It complicates the governance of the country, but it doesn't solve problems.
Do you expect the ANC in the run-up to the election suddenly to come up with 24 hours of electricity in Soweto and other metros?
Exactly. I mean, it's not going to happen. The ANC has been trying to solve, or so it says, has been trying to solve the electricity problem since 2007. And that's how many years ago, 14, 15 years ago, and it hasn't solved them in 15 years. It can't solve them now in the coming 6 months before the election. The expectation is that the election will be sometime April or May, which is normally when we hold elections.
There's been, it's 10 years since this week, since Nelson Mandela died, and I saw programs all over overseas about Mandela's legacy, and then they go and interview people in the townships, and some people would say, no, the deal that he got wasn't the best deal we could have had. What do you say about the criticism that there is against Nelson Mandela's legacy?
Well, I think the deal that Mandela or the ANC got from the National Party was the best deal they could get. It's actually much better. It was a much better deal relative to their real strength on the ground. The National Party was a very formidable government. It had a functioning army. It had a functioning police. It had a functioning civil service. And the ANC had tried since 1960 to try and undermine those structures, and it hadn't succeeded. So I think the ANC got a very good deal. We have to be thankful to Mandela's leadership for the deal that he produced, which is the constitution that we have in South Africa today. It's a good constitution for our country. Of course, there's lots of room for improvement, but it's a good constitution for our needs and for our purposes. I wouldn't say it's the best in the world, but I think it's a good constitution. So I think people who know nothing about the reality of South Africa at the time, or between, let's say, between 1950 and 1990, they couldn't know what the real South Africa looked like. the National Party built a formidable army and a formidable military industry. It was no pushover, not by a long shot. In fact, I talked to Pete Botha. I did ask him, why did they negotiate when they negotiated? And Pete Botha's answer, and I had good relations with Pete Botha, Pete Botha's answer was that their most immediate fear were the whites, because the whites would not accept the destruction of their standard of living to defend apartheid. He said that was more the immediate challenge that they were faced with. What was that the whites were going to turn against the National Party government for destroying the standard of living of the whites in order to protect the apartheid system. He said that was more of an immediate threat to the National Party. So they had to negotiate. So, as I keep saying, South Africa is an old country with a lot of moving parts, but many people think it's because of the notion of apartheid, people got to thinking that South Africa is a one-dimensional society. Whites hate blacks, so blacks hate whites. They think that's what South Africa is about. It was never about that. It isn't about that today. It has a hugely complex social structure. It has a very complex economic system. It has all those things, and you have to put in a huge amount of effort to try to get to understand how South Africa operates.
And you've been a critic of BBE or BEE for a long time. So is that the way to build South Africa, or to give that?
It's not. You see, this is a manifestation of the colonial mindset of the ruling elite in South Africa. The ruling elite in South Africa has this inferiority complex, and it wants to be like white people, but it wants to be like white people through consumption rather than through being productive. So it wants the white people to give them assets to consume. That's what black economic empowerment is. So this is not an elite that is a production-oriented elite. That is a creative elite like you see in Asia. This is an elite that's riddled with inferiority complex towards white people, and it feels it cannot create its own wealth through its own risk-taking and hard work. It must get wealth given to it by white people. So these are mega fundamentals of the South Africa problem, which is why our railways fall apart, because the elite who inherited them not only have no skills, but they don't see them as important, because all they want is to use them to consume, not to produce. So these are the fundamentals that people like. I mean, I read the article in the Financial Times by David Peeling. He has no clue what he's talking about, because he doesn't understand the fundamentals of South Africa's problems. It's not actually the ANC. The ANC gave a false promise to South Africa. Cyril gave South Africans a false promise that he can solve the problems. But in real terms, they haven't got that capacity. They haven't got the foundation. Where we have to look at, South Africa today is floating because of the private sector. And the political elite has no role in the private sector. If anything, it's undermining the private sector through mismanagement of those aspects of state assets that impact on the operations of the private sector. like the railways, the ports, electricity, and so on. So I think this is important to try and put across. I don't know if we talked about it last night.
That's okay. And do you think it's time to abandon BEE?
It should never have been adopted. It should never have been adopted because, for reasons it reinforces the inferiority complex of the black people. We want to build confidence in our black population so that they can start to take risks. They can have the confidence to say, okay, I can own a farm and I can manage a farm. I can own a little enterprise and I can run it. BEE tells you, I can't own anything. I need a white person to give me wealth if I need wealth. I can't create wealth myself. So it reinforces the inferiority complex that the black middle class and the black elite inherited from the colonial period.
Moeletsi Mbeki, thank you so much.
Thank you.